All right. Hey, everybody out there. It looks like everything's working, and we are also in our Discord. If you've never, I can't imagine that you've never been there, but we have a Dungeon Smith section where people could jump in and ask questions and stuff. If you're in the Dungeon Smith tier of our Patreon, you can you know, we'll add you to the show when we're doing questions, and we'll just kind of fold you into what we're doing here. Uh, I'm Jason. I am usually the dungeon I'm always the dungeon. Why do I say usually? Um, you're a dungeon master though
You
too,
can be there
Bree.
twice. Sometimes. Too.
You are though. Like you at least once a month.
Yeah, I guess. Whatever.
So Bree's obviously selling herself short. If you've ever listened to Java, then
I'm
you know,
sorry.
well, okay.
No, if you've ever listened to Java, I'm sorry.
No, 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 no. I hear you, but it's listening to you from episode 1 all the way up till now. Like I could hear you role playing in the other room. Like last time you played, you're doing voices and stuff, and you never would have tried that in your first session. So it's going
No,
good.
no, I would not.
Also, uh, let me give you a brief rundown of what's happening on this side, because episodes have definitely slowed down, and there's a reason for that. Alex is about to be a new dad, and there's been some health problems for some of the other groups. So 3 of our groups are just down right now. So Invasion is going to be going up next week, and we're doing chats with the cast. So just it started out like we were going to do just character stuff. But the very first person I sat down with was Ryan Haywood, and we quickly learned that, yeah, that's not, I, there's
We're
really
gonna
no
have to put a
format.
disclaimer on that one.
Well, that makes it sound like it was like disgusting or something like that. But it like we talked about
It is.
politics, we talked about a bunch of different stuff. So,
Yeah.
like I enjoyed it quite a lot. But
Yeah.
we already have like three of those in the bag, and we're working on a fourth one. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
We got both Ryans and a Jasper so far. Um, we're gonna try to get a Kelsey tomorrow, and then Jameson on Monday.
Hmm.
I'm also around, so like we can do that whenever.
Yeah. That one, you're the easiest person to schedule. I could just knock on your door. Today we're going to be
That's
talking
the perfect disclaimer. Warning, Ryan.
uh today we're going to be talking about taking your world that you're working on, whether it's something that's been around for a long time, whether it's something you're just getting started, and folding your character's backstory into it. There's a few different ways of doing it, and there's also a few different scenarios, like setup wise. So, for most of this, I'm going to assume that you pretty much have your stuff worked out. You know what your setting is, you know what the rules for your setting your setting is, and you at the very least can answer very basic questions. um because in a perfect world, when you go to run a campaign, and let's say you're just getting started, and you have your world worked out, but let's say you have 4 new players. They just formed a group, they're jumping in, they're going to be asking you questions about your world. If it's an original setting, then they're going to be asking you probably a lot about magic, because that's a huge part of D&D. And I think okay, maybe this is just me. Let me ask the chat and everybody in here. Bree's a little low on Twitch. Okay, let's see. There. I turned you up a little bit, Bree. Um
How do I sound, guys? How we doing?
oh, you are a little soft on. Wow, I'm not used to
Am I a
that.
little soft?
I'm just going to
Oh,
turn you all the way up. There you go. You should be a little bit better now.
okay. Hi
Brian, how you
guys.
doing? How you doing, Brian? I haven't seen. I just got a message from Brian earlier. I have to send out GoatCon prizes. So, assuming that you're just getting started, you have your group. Is it weird of me to assume that you're probably going to be homebrewing stuff? I feel like that's a majority of people out there running. It's
Yeah, I think
like
that's the norm now.
not a total conversion of like 5e, but you might exclude some monsters or a spell or something like that because you just don't like it. And I don't know. I feel like that's pretty much the norm. So you have to have all that listed out. We have a banned spells list, and
We do.
we probably have to update that because I don't think we've read the newest book. We definitely haven't
No.
added stuff from the newest books, but also
Yeah.
in my old age, I'm letting more spells pass. Uh, I think I think I was very restrictive when we first started out. Druids got slammed pretty hard. Not because we were targeting druids. We were just
They
going
got
through
slammed right into trees that they could not stride through on account of lacking that spell. And
teleportation's
honestly,
a tough one though, because it's
yeah,
such
Grid
an
2 really fucked that up for everybody. Um, which I think that any the problem isn't any individual spell so much. Like, yes, that can become a problem, especially when you have a low magic world like Theria, but when one group has 4 or 5 people and they all have access to a type of spell
yeah.
that is generally speaking not OP until you can do it 6 or 7 times in one fight, which is what happened with teleportation specifically.
Yeah, it's a
Then
little
it becomes a problem.
difficult. It's definitely a little difficult when you're trying to balance stuff in your head, and you're like, okay, well, obviously, in a fight, teleportation kind of gets you out of most jams. So if you have two or three party members that can do that, you have to start worrying about what stacks with each other because obviously teleportation's one that jumps out, but there's also like if you have, I don't know, let's say you have a couple of bards, they can, while their stuff doesn't necessarily stack, one could be doing especially if they have different, I want to say subdomains because I'm working on clerics. If they have different schools, like they
Mhm.
it can stack super fast and really throw your combat completely out the window. Like once they have that aha moment of, oh, we could just do this, and
Yeah.
you kind of skate through a fight, it can be a little frustrating. So some people throw spells out. We've done that. You can, you know, whatever it is. Maybe orcs don't exist in your world. Having players know what all those rules are is super important to the process because like okay, let's come at it like this. Let's say I'm DMing and you're creating a character, right?
Okay. That's
um
that's new and different, but
it
we
is
can
new and different.
try.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
you had been listening
We
to the
can
show.
try to think of that.
When you made Jadzia, what were some of the first
Ye
questions you had?
Well, I mean, obviously you set up the campaign for Judd's for that group, humans only. I'm the only one who followed that rule. I'm never gonna
Yeah,
take that's a feather in my cap where it's like I am a good girl who follows the rules. That's not true. Marcus was also human. Um, but after it became um I got the outline of what we had to be, which is essentially like, hey, you guys are the bad guys here. You guys are Overwatch. Overwatch are racist zealots. So in creating a backstory, I kind of worked backward from there, where obviously playing a bad guy is a little bit more difficult. There's a lot more nuance, but you have to get into the mindset of what could put someone in a position where they would think these things.
right.
and that's kind of where I built my backstory is like, okay, I'm gonna have this person who's been hurt and who has laid the blame at the feet of entire races of creatures instead of at the people, the specific people who hurt her. So like I didn't really have any questions beyond like what is the point. And it also helps that obviously I was listening to the show, so I didn't have any questions about the world so much. That would
Yeah,
normally be people's first questions is like, okay, is it high magic? Is it low magic? Like, what are the names of the towns? What are the names of the cities? I knew all of that because show.
and it's
So,
almost cheating, right? Like to
yeah.
have, like, okay, if you're playing, okay, we just hosted a bunch of games at the library. And I was really lax with stuff because there's some younger people there, right? Like I'm not like the first game I hosted for the library was for a literal family. Like a mom came in
Yeah.
with her 3 kids, and like one of them was like
One of them
5.
threw a guinea pig. Yeah.
Yes. So like obviously I'm playing super loose with stuff. I'm trying to engage kids, but the second game that I hosted was mostly adults. And that was a little bit different. They were all very good about asking. It's like, "Hey, do you allow this in your world?" blah blah blah. But having a show that someone can listen, well, if they're already listening, it's like cheating because they a lot of those questions are answered. They don't have to ask this, but obviously most people are just going to have to give an elevator pitch. One of the things that I had someone when we announced this topic, they came to me and they were asking, don't hand your players a book. Do not hand them a history of your world because they're not going to read it. No one, I wouldn't read it. I
That's
Ryan G
not
Soto, how
that's
you
not
doing?
necessarily true. That's like we have I could think of like I'd say 25% of our cast would read it.
Sure.
You got your Kelseys, you got your me's, you got your Mandys, you got more people, I'm sure, that
But again, that's cheating because like we're friends and we've known each other for a while and like that's what I do. But like
Mhm.
let's say you're getting a pickup game going at work and you got a bunch of people who have played D&D or you got some people who are curious about it. If one of the first barriers to entry is like, okay, well, here you go. I have 20 pages. Here's all about the fifth age of my world. And we're not playing in the
Yeah.
fifth age, but you need to know these
But
things.
this really this is foundational to the universe.
Right. You're really
To
getting started on
understand the
the
world we're in,
worst.
we really have to go back to the pre-cataclysm age and like you lose everyone for
Yeah,
that.
because it's
Um
too much. What it feels like is your world is concrete. And any players coming into one, it's boring sitting there reading all that, but it feels like there's nowhere for players to kind of fit. It feels like you're telling them what happened and is going to happen in your world, and they just kind of play in it. And what we're shooting for is that like a perfect mesh, right? And I think some of the best campaigns are sort of bred from the DM working with players, not necessarily super closely. I think that if the system we have now, and again, it's cheating. We've been playing together for years and stuff, but mostly players go off and they think about what they want to play and then they come up with a backstory for it and what are some foundational things about that character. I always, when I ask for backstories, which is anytime we're playing for the main show, or something we're going to be doing on Patreon for a while. It's 3 things, right? How were they raised? What are their aspirations or goals? And usually I ask for like 2 or 3, like what are 2 or 3 moments in their life that they would say pop out, right? Um,
mhm.
how would you, being a player, what advice would you give to other players out there, whether they're just getting started or have been doing this for a long time? Like, what advice would you give them on like working with a DM?
I think one of the biggest things is that when you craft your backstory, think of it as you're crafting it from one person's perspective. I think G Soto actually asked a really good question in the question portion where he asked, like,
Hmm.
as a DM, how much do you change in a character's backstory? I wouldn't call it changing, but using Jadzia as a fantastic example. When I wrote Jadzia's backstory, Patrick was just an Overwatch soldier. I never said anything about him being like a spy or questioning their like alliances or anything like that. That was Jason only. And I loved that because it added another dimension. So what I'd say is if you're crafting a backstory, leave open lines of like leave open story points where it's like this is what it looked like from their point of view. That doesn't mean you have to write in there, but actually this happened. It's just like, hey, that might be what happened, but if the DM wants to take that and run with it,
Hmm.
leave that open and try to be excited when they get to that cuz I know some people treat their backstories like super precious, and I think that's good and bad because like obviously it's great that you care about your character, but in the same way that you don't want to present a player with the history of your world right away because it feels so solid and impenetrable, the same can be true for a backstory where it's like if you've already outlined these things so concrete that you're not willing to have your character have misunderstood anything or like been uninformed about something, like that isn't realistic. Like we as people, we only ever see one side of things, and you have to leave your backstory open for the other side of things.
I think the best way to come at it is both the DM and the player have 75% of stuff done. Like, there are, like, okay, as a DM, when a player comes to you and says, I would like to, here's my character, blah, blah, blah. Um, Never, like, I wouldn't change any foundational stuff. Like, this is such a strange example, but like, this is a please don't poop in the fountain rule.
Do
um,
you want
you,
to explain that for anyone who doesn't know about
yes.
pooping in the fountain?
Okay. If you're ever walking around and you see somebody or you see a sign that is so out of left field that like it's like please don't poop in the fountain. That means someone pooped in the fountain at one time and it had to be stated because you got to kind of build things for the lowest common denominator. I've seen DMs change the race, gender of characters. I've seen them change classes for, don't do any of that. I know it's such a weird.
That's
I
weird.
I don't know anyone personally that would do that, but I feel like that's a really good way to lose a player. So I
That
think,
just makes it seem like you weren't paying attention to their backstory. Like
well, oh,
if your character has a sister that suddenly becomes a brother, it feels like, oh, that didn't like my backstory doesn't matter.
I think that's what it comes down to. It's like, oh, but I, this specific DM, this is them asking questions and stuff, and they're basically like, well, I didn't want any women in the campaign because I didn't want any inter party romance. And the first thing it's like
Ugh.
that's not going to stop. Like, okay, hold on. Like that, there's a lot to
You've
unpack there.
forgotten several things.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, but it's like, okay, I understand you don't want, yeah, like if you have a bad
That reminds me
experience.
of the NASA thing where it's like we're gonna send only women to the moon. That way, there's no
Yep.
conflict. It's like, uh,
I obviously, if you have a bad experience with, romance in a campaign or something and you want to try to avoid that, I understand, but don't change stuff about a character's, backstory. a really good way to look at it is, again, 75-75. You have 75% of your world mapped out, but you have stuff open. You give people, who said it in the chat, opportunity roll. I tend to use a paragraph of history summary, nothing too heavy, but enough that they know how the world came about. So it's a basic foundational stuff for the world. You're telling people, it's like, well, here's the big stuff that's happening right now, and then you're just, it's like little elevator pitches. You kind of got stuff out. So if people want to ask questions, if they want to know more about a specific thing, it's like, hey, over here you mentioned that these two clans have been at war. Why? What? If a player wants to come from one of those clans, great. They can ask questions about it. You can answer, but it's completely unnecessary to give them a history of all that if no party members interacting with it right now. I think players coming in having 75% of your character ready to go, like where did they come from, and then asking questions. It's like, hey, do you allow druids in your campaign? Are bugbears okay? That type of thing. Then it's nothing that's going to change who and what your character is, but it is stuff that it kind of shows that you're ready to work with somebody and it's not concrete. As a player, and it just occurred to me that, like, next time we should get you on camera and like just make you a part of it, honestly. But as a player, what do you feel is the worst thing a DM can do to kind of, but besides asking you to just change the race and gender of your character and just kind of, but what's the worst thing a DM can do to make you feel like they're not necessarily shutting you down, but not totally open to suggestions? Have I ever done? Like, have I ever done something? Because you've made a bunch of characters for the show. Have I ever
Yeah.
kind of stepped in and said, "No, I don't want to do that," but and just kind of steer you away?
There was like Vampire the Masquerade, but that was more of a us misunderstanding fundamentally what the setting was going to be because I was going like high Vampire the Masquerade, and you were like, I just want these to be normal fucking dudes. So like at first, Tommy was going to
Right.
be like a cult leader, and then I ended up like leaving that game anyway because I could not handle the amount of silliness that happened in that game.
Yeah, I
Um,
there was nothing inherent when I pitched it that it's like, hey, this is going to be a really silly campaign. I think we played one session. It's like, oh, this is what this is going to be,
yeah,
and
this is the vibe.
I think you sat through
It's a good
two.
vibe.
Yeah, no, it was super fun. I'd love to do another run, but like I think you got like two sessions in and you were like, I'm good.
I feel I'm never really like I'm not really good at in character jokes. Like I'm not good at playing like characters that are filled with whimsy or like goofiness. Like I'm fine making jokes out of character, but my characters are always pretty serious. And I've yet to be able to like break out of that. It'd be nice if I could, but like I think I need to take some improv classes or something to ever get into that situation cuz
So okay, here's the thing. I've heard you say stuff like that before, and I think you're forgetting about a key factor in, like, let's say I'm creating a silly campaign, and let's say um I'm really pushing for you to play because I think you'd be good in it. And we have like three other players and they're creating very silly characters. I feel like you're forgetting about the straight man. Like, you don't necessarily need to be like throwing pies in people's face and stuff like that, but there's someone there to set the ball for someone else to spike it, and they're still part of the joke. It's there's
that's true.
still there's still a way to be a part of that story and be someone, uh, like someone contributing to that kind of vibe without you necessarily having to be like, you know like a clown, I guess. I do want to. Okay, let's do this. I'm going to take questions in just a couple seconds because we had like three or four, and yeah. So there's something as a DM, GM, whatever you want to call it. Uh, there's the judo approach. I'm assuming that both the DM and the player are ready to work together and ready to kind of compromise. There are some no goes, right? If, for instance, I'm playing in a campaign and there's no bugbears in this world, and then someone comes in and immediately it's like, well, I'm the first bugbear, and you yeah, like it's a bit presumptuous. uh it's second only to, well, I'm the son of this king that no one knew about. That it's like that, stop, because you're coming in and telling me what is happening, and it's a little, I think it's a little bit rude, but it's not like you're trying to be. Brian said in the chat here, it's like collaborative storytelling, like emphasis on that. I'm ready to work with somebody if it's a good idea and it's something that could have happened. I have to trust that person a lot
Mhm.
because I learned that trusting everybody, if I even if I don't know them, Scott is a perfect example. Marcus is a perfect example of that went a bit too far, and I don't think the communication was there. And that's a good example of when things go poorly. Um, I think a really good example of things going well is like you said, like with Jadsy's dad and the whole reveal for that. Like it, we were still working together, but you didn't necessarily know well ahead of time, right? So
Yeah.
there's no chance for you to telegraph that, but it's
Yeah.
not like you were
Jadzia
left
found
out,
out with the rest of the group, and like she
right?
was on the fence about whether or not she was cool with that betrayal, but she was already kind of thinking about like maybe racism is bad. Like,
There's a lot of context for that whole story, but
yeah.
I,
But yeah.
I I feel like, so if both parties are ready to work together, and let's say somebody comes in and it's just a hard no, it's no but, not yes and, right? So you're kind of taking that, it's like, okay, not a bugbear, but maybe there's like a curse in your family, you're just really hairy, like like it's a shape-shifting thing. Like we don't have a term for that in our world, but you're basically, for all intents and purposes, you're a bugbear, but it's specific to you. You're not part of a new race. We're not introducing, it's like, and the bugbear, like we're not just throwing a whole race that would really screw up your timeline and your world and where do they live and all that. But it is kind of providing for a player who, let's say, for whatever reason, that is a hill to die on for them. Well, I want to be this. Okay. Well,
I can't
and
imagine a player who like dead to rights, I need to be a bugbear or I will not play in this campaign.
but
That's
again,
how they
I
picture it.
it could be whatever.
Yeah.
I because there are people who want to play the same character in every campaign. So it's like, yeah, but I have this character I really like, and they are this race, this class, blah blah blah. And I've seen people walk because they couldn't. It's like, well, I'm a hunter. It's like, yeah, but we already have two hunters. It's like, well, they're gonna have to change, and you kind of get weird opening animosity for a campaign. But you as the DM are going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to folding a player's backstory into your campaign. And you may need to tell a player yes or no based on stuff that that player doesn't know about your world, right? If there's a big bad you haven't revealed, or some sort of like some sort of magical source that ties into some of their powers, and they don't know about that in campaign yet, it's okay to just basically say, okay, trust me, it wouldn't work for where we're going and what we're doing, but, and then offer them something at least kind of comparable, like kind of in the ballpark of what they're asking for. And honestly, you could tell a lot about a player by how ready they are to kind of pivot a little bit. I think
And if
most.
you're really
Please.
desperate, I feel like asking them, "What do you like about this?" Like that's incredibly important because you might like okay, there's a player who like really wants to be a bugbear
Mhm.
and you don't know why. There might be something in your world that like totally makes sense for all the reasons they like the bugbear race. It's like, oh, well, I really like the social aspect of having a character that's kind of feral be with the group. And it's like, okay, we don't have bugbears, but we do have kobolds. Have you thought about a kobold? And then it turns out that kobold's actually perfect for them because it was never about being hairy. That's just what you assumed. What it actually was they just wanted to be a feral little gremlin in the party, and there's a perfect solution for that right there for them. Like little things like that, like just asking, like, what do you like about this thing, and seeing if they'll actually, tell you. Because some people will just kind of shut you down there. But
For me, it was always about being hairy. I that is
yeah,
integral to me as a person and my character. So it's I'm just playing me.
I like the else in the chat. Like me, I want to be the feral gremlin. And I'm like, yeah, so does Sam. We both are married. We both are very much in love with feral gremlins, Jason.
Yep. I yep. I talked. So okay. We, we were talking yesterday and eventually, you know, when we get back to the West Coast, we'll all move in together, right? That's a long ways off, but it's the goal. And I was telling Bree that for all of our mental health, there should be one day out of the month where we split up and just kind of bitch about our partners. Like Elle and Sam can go bitch, and then we'll bitch, and like it's an airing of grievances. Like just kind of
And we'll
it's
all
like
come together and we'll watch wrestling. It'll be great.
um let's do some questions because we got a couple of detailed ones. Yours is one, so you can read yours in a minute.
Ooh.
G Soto in the Discord says, question: how much of the character backstory should be used as quote unquote true? Obviously, you don't want to say what happened didn't really happen, but making a small twist or something to shock the player might be good, right? And you already gave an example of that, but
Hmm.
I think asking asking a player, hey, it's like, hey, do you mind if I like turn a little something on its head if it ties you into the story and I think you'll like it? I think most people would say yeah. I think that's a risky move to pull off with someone you just met, but ask them what they're game for, ask them how much it's, how much of this is gospel to you, how much of this just cannot be changed, and then just kind of, you can ask without giving them something explicit. Like you're not saying it's like, well, I'm going to make it so that you don't have hands, but you don't know that yet. Obviously, that's ridiculous. that, that's ridiculous. But if you're changing, it's like, oh, well, your real father is this. That's a major change for a character. And I think it's fair to kind of ask, it's like, hey, if you've known them for 10 years or something, and you really think it's something they'll dig, take a swing, but be ready for them to go, I hate that. And you might have to backtrack it. You might have to, it depends on how much they're willing to kind of work with you. And to the same token, if they want to slip something into your world that has been established is a rule and they want to be the exception to that rule, even if it's small, you need to be willing to kind of trust them and say, okay, yeah, we could do that, but here's the parameters so that we don't open the floodgates and just kind of erase it, you know? You had a question.
I did. Should I ask it?
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right here. You might as well, yeah.
um, so my question was, how important do you feel burying the lead is when it comes to backstory related quests in games? I've had a couple in mind for characters in the game I'm running, but I'm worried about it seeming forced or too obvious from the get go. And also, what worries me about that is if it's really obvious, like, okay, let's say I have a character named Bob,
Mhm.
and something from Bob's backstory comes up. I'm worried that all of his other companions, when his backstory comes up, are going to feel shafted because they're not a part of this. So obviously, it's important to weave the character's backstory into the main plot somehow, or at least interesting enough that the other characters will kind of care. But mostly, I was wondering, like, do you feel like it needs to be hidden that you're about to get into a backstory thing, or should you just like be like, here we go, buckle up?
Well, okay. The I guess the easy answer to that is I don't think it needs to be a secret, but it does depend on what you're doing. Like, let's say you're doing like a Legend. No one's even going to remember Legend of Dragoon. That's a 30-year-old RPG. Oh God. So let's say you're
Oh,
doing.
dust, you're gonna die.
I'm fading as I speak. Let's say okay. Let's say you're doing a Darth Vader "I am your father" moment, right? Obviously, let's pretend in that scene the entire group is there, right? So Han and Chewie and Leia are right there. Now, obviously, that's a major thing to drop on players, but that doesn't take away from the investment everyone else should have in it. Like, it obviously changes things for whoever would be playing Luke. That doesn't mean Leia's any less pissed off about fucking Alderaan blowing up, right? Like, it's
Hmm.
the stakes are still there. It just
Hi,
changed.
Kyle. I'll be there.
Oh, oh, there. I forgot speech was on for those. Thank you, Fungus. So the stakes are still there and the story is still there. It just twists it for that one person, and it may make the party look at whoever's playing Luke in that situation. It may make them look at his difference like your dad's Darth Vader. Oh shit! Like what does that what does that mean for us? What does that mean for you? I don't
Hmm.
think that just because one player might be tied to the situation a little bit more, that that has to reduce anyone's involvement in the story or make it feel like they're just kind of background furniture, just part of the scenery, right?
Right.
What you were so okay. In your example, you're talking about like an NPC that's part of the backstory and the players don't know about it, or one of the players is much more tied to it and the rest of the group doesn't know about it.
Well, like, okay, I'm trying to not give stuff away while also describing the situation I'm in because this is this
Exactly.
is like they could be listening.
Sure.
Um, so I have four characters with four different backstories, obviously, and there are certain parts of some of them that I'd like to bring in. I'm real quiet. Someone says I'm real quiet on Twitch.
Man, that is not usually your problem.
That's not my problem usually. Thank you.
Also, everyone remembers Legend of Dragoon. That's fantastic.
If everyone is two people, you are correct.
That's everyone. That's all I needed to
And one of them's your wife.
still counts. She counts for extra, actually. So yeah, I have you turned up as much as you can go. So you might just have to
Okay,
get closer to the mic.
I'll try to be louder. Is this okay? Is this hurting anyone?
Yeah.
It's 1-4. I don't know what that means.
Like one quarter the
Um
volume of me, I think.
lame. Sorry guys. So I'll try to be Oh, he says it's better. Good. Um what I'm worried about because they're from four very different places. So I can't
Mm-hmm.
really try to weave them all into one storyline. So it's also a thing where they don't have an overarching world changing quest. So they're kind of taking things one thing at a time as they're coming to them. They're an early level party.
Right.
So whoever's backstory I introduce first, it'll probably be very much just that person's backstory. I'm not going to be able to weave in someone else's backstory because they're from a completely different place, completely different time.
Right.
Um, so first of all, I feel like it's going to be really obvious right away who the backstory is for, and I'm worried that the other characters won't have much to do during that, and I'm also worried that it'll be contrived, because it's very episodic. I understand, like, part of D&D is contrivance, like, you always kinda have to be in the right place at the right time,
Sure.
but, I worry about that kind of thing.
It's
I worry about
so
lots of things.
you do. So okay, I'm going to use an example of like old school RPGs, and I'm gonna get to that in 1 second. But I I want to get to this. Oh, I'm worried that the other players who aren't a part of that backstory won't have something to do. I feel like there's two types of character payoff stuff. Let's use Jadzia as an example. So
Mhm.
Darmok obviously was this abusive like keeper basically. It wasn't like they were dating, like it was a kidnapping kind of. So
Yeah.
there's Jadzia telling everybody in the party. Let's say that there's a late night sitting around the campfire, kind of it's like, okay, here, look, here's why I am the way I am. I'm really worried about this, and the party helping to do something about that. Darmok is an external threat. He is something that the party can go interact with and do something about. But there's the other kind of internal, not necessarily a threat, but something internal that the character needs to tackle by themselves. If you think about the D&D movie Holga going to see, I forget what her boyfriend's name, the little hobbit guy. So going to see her halfling ex-boyfriend and them having a conversation and her just kind of dealing with that would be weird if there's a party sitting behind Holga like audience members. Is like, woo, yeah, like it would be weird. It would take away from that moment. And I think recognizing what that is, even if it's something that is only for one player to deal with, the party helping them deal with it, and the party getting them prepared emotionally or physically or whatever it is to deal with that thing is still important. Uh, you play, okay, why am I asking? I know you're playing Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah.
You
Fucking
mentioned,
love Baldur's Gate. Yeah.
can you tell everybody out there
Mhm.
what you did when, and potential spoilers for Baldur's Gate 3, but there is an area of the game that is very important to one of the characters potentially in your party where you have to do a bunch of trials. Can you explain to everybody what you did?
I eventually got it.
You did.
First of all, I want to open with that. The first two times I played through Char's Trials, I brought the whole party through. And then I had to replay it because Asterion broke up with me, and no, so I had to go back and do basically all of Act 2 again with the same character. And I wanted to do Char's Trials faster. So then I told Jason about this really cool cheat I found, like this really elite hack, this strategic brain move that no one else would have thought of, which is just doing Shadowheart in the trials and leaving the rest of the party in the background, like ungrouping and just playing, right? Like completely out of the blue, like real elite gamer skills thinking. Definitely not exactly what they tell you to do at the start.
I honestly thought I was mishearing you when you said that, because you were like, yeah, I just decided to take one person. And I'm like, wait, were you trying to sneak an entire party through that maze with all the fire and stuff like
Yeah,
that? And just,
I sure fucking did.
why would you do that? So even
Including
though,
fucking Karlak. Each time Karlak was
yeah,
with me.
so in that game, obviously these things are important to Shadowheart, but that doesn't mean the party isn't there supporting and being there with Shadowheart and preparing. You know what I mean? Those moments where you're sitting around a campfire or talking at the camp later at night and she describes why it's important to her and why, all that still means something. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the party has to be completely taken out of it. As far as
Mhm.
hinting, like this is a very common thing where if you have four party members, let's say you're playing an old school RPG, and we look at character backstories, like we look at, it's like, oh, here's the fire world, here's the wind world, here's the ice world. If you guys are out traveling and things get super cold, it's like, well, we know who this involves. You know what I mean? Like, they might glom onto it right away. They might say, oh, this is for Xavier. Like, oh, okay. If they do, that's fine. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to take away, unless it's a huge reveal you're working toward. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to take away from what they're doing. It just means that they're paying attention, and that's kind of a good thing. If it is a huge surprise that you're working toward, I would do my best to treat it like real world events. And here's what I mean by that. So, let's say let's say in real life our quest is to get back to California, right? Our quest is to get
Yes.
back to the West Coast. You, me, and Elle are in a party. Now, California is the destination, but our reasons for wanting to go back there might overlap a little, but we also have our own, like, intrinsic reasons. uh I For me, it's just the vibe of that place and like people's attitudes. And I I was born on the East Coast. I'm not feeling it. You obviously want to get there for Sam. There's
Mhm.
other reasons you want to go, but like that's a
Yeah.
major thing for you. Let's say that's your backstory plot. You want to get there. You want to, it's like, okay, then I'll be happy, right? You have a goal in your head. That doesn't mean that that's the end. So getting to Sam isn't it. Like when you got, and then, obviously life keeps going. But just because the party knows you're heading to California, they know that means a lot to you. That doesn't mean they're not going to have things to do on the way. And I think it's very important to not just have that thread lead them to the backstory, but there has to be stuff along the way that they're interested in. There has to be characters that are going to be affected. So it might be a thing where the rest of the party's like, yeah, we met this dog and this dog ran away. And we know the dog's owner's in California. We want to help you do your thing, but also we want to drop this dog off and we want to make sure it gets back with its owner, you
Right.
know? Does that make any sense? I
Yeah.
used like eight
No, that does
metaphors.
make sense.
Okay.
Yes,
Oh,
in between the metaphors, I was able to kind of get the point.
good. Okay. That's good. Does anyone else have any specific questions for this? Because it's a tough topic to talk about and not give specifics. And I'm trying to kind of obviously weave like general rules of thumb in there. I so one of the big things on top of don't hand your players a book when you're getting started. Um, don't just hand your players a thing saying you can't do this, 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 or this. Like, here's a banned spell list. Here's all the blocked classes. Here's all the blocked races I don't want. Don't just hand them that because it feels obviously it feels super restrictive, but it also doesn't tell them what they can do in terms of like how is your world different from, let's say, the books where it's like, oh yeah, you guys get inspiration every day when you wake up, or oh, you get to swing with advantage if you're flanking. Because I don't think that's an explicit rule in the book. I think that's a homebrew thing we do, but everyone runs combat a little differently. Throw that stuff in there to make sure that they know you're not just taking things away from their creativity and their character backstory, right?
Right. I have a question for you.
Please.
So when you're reading a character backstory,
Mhm.
what, like, let's say we had a brain scan going at the same time. What would make that excited part of your brain like wake up? Like, obviously, you're reading the backstory just to understand the character better, but what sort of hooks do you as a DM look for specifically to be like, oh man, I can tie that to blankety blank. I can use this to do something. Like what sort of situations in a backstory do you really perk up when you see?
I've noticed something, and I guess I have to kind of describe it visually, but I've noticed something in the way a lot of you guys write backstories, and I'm obviously talking about the cast. We have like an 18-person cast. It's huge. And usually character backstories are delivered in 3 or 4 paragraphs, right? And there's like the starting point. Usually it's, I was born in X town and I was raised, as my dad was a hunter or something like that. So there's a jumping off point, and then there's usually something in between that gets the character to the next big thing. Usually you guys write 3 or 4 defining moments for a character. Like, okay, right off the bat, we know where that character's from. We have a rough time period. So I, as a DM, know it's like, okay, you were raised in Dern Hollow. So there was a whole portion where that town, a good portion of that town's economy burned down, right? So were you there during that time? Did you know? So we have things to work off of right there. Uh, a character's class sometimes can tell you a lot about where they went in the world or where they could have been in the world. If they're a monk, you don't just wake up one day and become a monk. You have to train. It's like, okay, where did you train? And there's little hop off points. It's usually like 3 or 4. And I kind of look at every time that character touches the world, there's like a little shockwave, and there's stuff that you can use around that area. And kind of, you might have to
Mhm.
ask them defining questions. It's like, hey, you said you were raised in Dern Hollow. Okay, um, what age did you leave? So you're asking them clarifying questions. They probably don't know why, but you're asking them questions so that you can line stuff up on your end and go, okay, you might invent characters that didn't exist before you talked to this person. Like, let's say there was a bunch of bullies you just invented, and they have names and backstories and all that stuff, and now they existed in Dern Hollow the same time that player character did. And let's say they picked on him and they did, there's stuff you can do that isn't going to hurt your world. It isn't going to change anything precious about your backstory. It didn't, in the 5th age, blah, blah, blah. Just because there's some bullies in camp, that doesn't mess that up. It doesn't change how magic is done, but you're making concessions for a character you're building together, and it makes the world feel more interesting. And obviously, it ties that character into the world. You might never visit Dern Hollow while you're out, but you might see those bullies on the road someday, or you might see. So that kind of stuff is, I think, it's so important to both player and DM to kind of merge stuff. That's what I mean when there's like a 75, you're both 75% ready, and then you come together and see where that kind of meshes.
Awesome. G Soto had a question for you.
Where's that? Oh,
It is
character
in character
backgrounds.
backgrounds. I can read
I
it
see.
if you'd like.
Please.
How do you help inspire people that can't make a character background?
I don't believe anybody can't make a
What did you
character
do for
background.
Tyler?
Okay. So obviously, I didn't ask for character backgrounds when we first started. Really, I kind of asked for like, what are you playing? And then we kind of figured stuff out from there. But when it came time, um, that one was almost cheating, because it's like, all right, man, we've been playing for 5 years. I need to know what, who is this guy? What? So I don't believe there's a person on the planet who can't make a background. I believe that uh, there's blank page syndrome where you sit down and just you don't have an idea or you don't have you're just intimidated by the lack of just the white void, that blank space. Um, you know what class you're playing, you know what race you want to play, you know what perks you want to take and stuff like that. So delve into that, use what you do have. Just like, okay, I see you picked history as something, a skill you want to be trained in. How did that happen? Like, were you a big history buff as a kid? Was your dad an archaeologist? Was you know like, ask questions like that and get them thinking about it, because you can't make up a backstory for them. They're not going to be tied to it, but ask them, make them start thinking about why they chose the things for their character. Or if you do random rolls and they have an 8 intelligence, it's like, well, what happened? Did you get hit in the head with like a rock or something? Do you have dyslexia and you're just not good at getting information traditionally, like reading? Ask them questions about what they've done and why they chose the things they did for their character, and you can usually extrapolate some form of a backstory from that. And then it's just connecting those things and kind of coming getting them to come up with like a basic tapestry of like, oh, okay, like from those choices you made, we have kind of a life and we can weave that into the world a bit.
Nice.
I don't
Very cool.
I don't think we have any more questions. So I'm probably going to wrap it up on our Discord and on Patreon. We're going to be asking you guys. Oh, hold on.
Mm, mm.
Blargles. I have a character.
Largle, largle.
I hear Murloc when um, I have a character with a surprise reveal to be done later in the campaign. How would you and a player work to incorporate hints throughout the campaign so that the reveal, okay, so wouldn't have any impact on the campaign itself? So you don't want to telegraph it, you don't want to, and we kind of talked about that a little, but there's two types. There's one that the player is in on and one that the player isn't in on. If the player is in on it, I would tell them, all right, follow my lead, don't drop hints yourself, but when certain things come up, it'll be like kind of a Manchurian candidate thing. Like you're like, it's like, okay, if we mention oatmeal, then oatmeal ties into your backstory. Your dad was the Quaker Oats guy, so we need to, like you. This sounds like a terrible campaign. I wouldn't run that, but start planting little hints, and it could be something as simple as, it's like, I'm not eating breakfast, and it's like, why? And it's like, nah, I'm just not hungry. And you know what I mean? It's like, oh, they were serving oatmeal. That could be something later on that they pick up on that isn't really an important detail in the moment, but it's something you look back on and go, oh shit, that's how you get a fight club. You're not trying to beat the players over the head with this stuff. It's something that they can, like, let's say they were rewatching the campaign in their head. It's something they can look back on and go, oh. Or just before the moment where that's going to be interesting, they start piecing it together and go, oh shit, oatmeal. And they kind of start running it through their head. That's that kind of works whether the player's in on it or not. But if the player's in on it, it's definitely a thing where you tell them, okay, look, I'm going to set the ball and you spike it, but don't just drop stuff in there, because you don't want the player to kind of rapid fire a bunch of hints in a row. And some players are bad at picking moments. Some DMs are bad at picking moments. So kind of working together, and it's like, hey, I'm going to try to hit these beats. Just kind of follow along. Don't really worry about it too much to kind of get a maximum payoff thing. Usually less is more. You don't want to hammer people over the head with
Question.
it. Mhm.
Do you think I feel like I know the answer for this for me personally, but do you think that there's a situation where there's something that the character should keep secret from the DM? Like if they want to surprise everyone, including the DM, do you think that's a good play for anyone? And what situation would you recommend that for?
That's a really advanced play. I think so. Okay. Speaking as of forever DM, I like DMing. I want to DM. 95% of the time, that's going to go terribly. Um, I'll tell you why. That I think that on paper, that sounds like a great idea, right? If let's say, let's take an easy one, right? Let's say you guys are out to beat someone that wants to take over the world, whatever. It's traditional D&D big bad stuff. And at the climactic point where you guys are facing off, let's say you're playing a character and you've been hiding this whole time. It's like, well, actually, I agree with the dragon, and the dragon should, like, now what? How does that play out? Like, do you fight with the
Stabby
dragon?
stab stab.
Right. And it's like you're gonna have 5 seconds where everyone goes, you're either gonna get the reaction you're looking for. It's like, what? I didn't see that coming, or what? Like, it's probably gonna be confusion because it hasn't been set up. There's no establishing markers for it, and the DM wasn't in on it to help facilitate. So you're going to show up and go, yes, I am the dragon's son. You didn't know, because it's like, okay, the DM's going to feel like you didn't trust them. So nothing's going to be set up. And the players are going to feel betrayed. And then the players are naturally going to look at the DM. And if the DM goes, I didn't fucking know about this, don't, then it looks like you didn't trust anyone and you're playing your own game. It's gonna go poorly. There is a 5% chance, maybe, that everyone goes, oh, and it's probably going to be over something. It has to be something small. It can't be something that completely changes the narrative or flip things on its head. It would have to be something like when Group 3 started. Let's say everyone did play a human, and then at some point, Izzy revealed, oh, I have pointed ears. I'm actually half elf. That would be something that it'd be like, okay, that's a yes end. We could definitely work with that. It does change things, maybe, for characters, and it gives them something to work with. All of a sudden, in a group that's all human and was raised all human around all humans, how do they react to knowing that their partner and maybe friend is a half elf? It gives them something to do. The other example is a huge fuck you to the party. It's a huge fuck you to the DM, a huge fuck you to the story. And you've kind of put yourself out on an iceberg. Like, you're out in the middle of nowhere. And you're probably one. That's probably the end of that session for the night, because the DM's got to go, all right, hold up, hold up, hold up. Okay.
Yeah, I got shit to work with now.
It's like, okay, you and I need to talk at the very least. And then from a mechanical standpoint, it's like, well, I balanced this fight for you guys versus a dragon. Now you don't have a healer. What the fuck do I do with that? Like, it's very,
Yeah.
going rogue is not a great option. That there's 1,000 reasons I could think of for you not to do it, and there's like 3 that might be kind of cool. Fungus, a little off topic, but what advice do you have for a DM who had a falling out with a player, but all the players are really close friends? Ooh, uh that's happened. Like, that's happened on the show, like, early on. I'd say there, there there were personal falling outs, but some people still remain friends, some didn't, and there's kind of like a fracturing of that group. And let's say the DM had a falling out with someone, and that person is still friends with the people in the group, but they're not really a part of the game anymore. That really depends on what the falling out was about. if it's like a mutual thing where it's like, hey, we don't agree, that's fine. And then when the subject comes up around like the friends that still hang out with them and you're cool with them, and it's like, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to, if it's really if it's really bad and you kind of had an axe to grind about it, I would be honest with the party. It's like, hey, I'm having a real hard time with this. It so and so did this. It really bothered me. I don't know if I can make up with them. I don't know if I can let it go. How do you guys want to handle it? Do we want to pull that part of the story out? That's probably going to involve not just the DM but players as well, because you might have to retcon something. You might have to just take that out to make the story continue. And that's where it being collaborative, like the best part is having people to tell a story with, but sometimes that can fall apart. Like personal relationships can change. People break up, people, move on, whatever. But it's really important to kind of work that out with players and just be honest. Opportunity Rule says the more info the DM has, the better they can work with the players to make that moment of hidden fact come to light. Kept in the dark, no pun intended, the moment might not be as impactful. That's absolutely true. And I think I'd say most of the time that's a trust issue where the player just doesn't trust the DM not to spoil it or mishandle it. It's like, this is my baby and I don't want to hand it to you because I don't know if you're going to tackle this in the way that I would like. And I don't want this big character thing to be diminished. That's a trust issue you need to work on. Just about everything needs to flow through you. If you're in charge of coming up with the story and hosting games and building combats and keeping track of XP and on and on and on, you need to be trusted with story elements so that you can help set those up and make it part of your world and make it meaningful and impactful. Uh, I think I think that's it. I want to thank everybody for hanging out and doing these and helping me kind of build a little lesson plan each week. We're going to be taking suggestions, and a new poll is going to go up at the beginning of March. It's going to be in our Discord. It's going to be in our Patreon. Uh, Bree, thank you for sitting in and doing this and asking questions and stuff. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you liked it.
Mm-hmm. Um, Thank you guys so much. If at any point you have feedback for us, if you want us to change a thing, or if you have a suggestion for a topic, please hit me up. Hit me up on Patreon or Discord or wherever you get a hold of me. And yeah, I'll add it to the great big list of things we want to do. We're going to be doing so, we're going to be doing some holiday sessions and recording those and having them in the feed. Like I said, 3 of our groups are kind of out for at least a month of recording. And,
Hmm.
I understand where, that's a little frustrating, but it's big life stuff and we just can't ask people to, play through that. It's like, yeah, I know you're having a kid. Let's go. We have a session to record. You can't do that. So
But what about the dragons?
yeah, exactly. Have you thought about that? The kid's not even forming memories yet. Let's go. Come on. Oh, thank you, G Soto. Thank you
Thanks
for
for
the
the
cheer.
seminar, Jason.
Oh, that creepy kid voice has got to go. I got to turn that off. Uh, it's super eerie.
What?
But we are recording character chat stuff, and that's going to be going up in the main feed. So we're not abandoning you completely. Obviously, you can go to Patreon at patreon.com/DANDR, and there is hundreds of hours of stuff in there. And I really hope that you guys go check it out and enjoy. Thank you all so much. We'll see you next month for a brand new seminar. I don't know what we're going to be talking about yet, but that's kind of up to you guys. So thank you so much. I hope what we talked about helps, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Hi, guys.